Among the greatest successes in the indie game development department is Hollow Knight. This is a game that came out back in 2018. It is essentially a Metroidvania game with, little bits of Souls-like elements, but it's its own game that just really took the world by storm with its tight gameplay, its unique aesthetic and music and presentation. It's just a really wonderful, phenomenal game that garnered mass critical acclaim from both critics and users alike. And people have been waiting for a sequel, Silksong, for just so many years now. And it came to a point where people were just like, this game's just never going to come out. It got teased a couple times. It got shown a couple times. I mean, even when that Xbox presentation happened where they said that Silksong would be out within the year, that year would pass and Silksong would still not be out. There's just been quite a few delays. But just recently, on August 21st, 2025, out of the freaking blue, Team Cherry, in conjunction with Gamescom happening, announced that Hollow Knight Silksong will be available on September 4th for all platforms and day one on Xbox Game Pass. September 4th is really not that far away, and this came as a major shock. They kind of shadow dropped a very near release date, and the world obviously went crazy. People have been waiting for this for so long, but people are also wondering what the heck just took so long, because as of September 4th, 2025, it'll have been over 7 years since the launch of Hollow Knight. It took them that long to make this new game. So today's story concerns what the heck happened on that front and why the way they developed Silksong ultimately puts away, a lot of AAA games are developed to shame. The first thing to highlight is just how massive Silksong is gonna be. I mean, right here we have a summary of some of the features we can expect from this title. Over 40 bosses, over 200 enemies. And the thing is, usually, when a game has that long of a development cycle, especially an indie game like Silksong, the general assumption is that there's trouble in paradise, that the game is going through development hell, as has been the case myriad times. We've seen games delayed again and again and again and again. But what's really fascinating about Silksong's development is that, based on what the developers have said, it's the complete opposite scenario, where it's not that there was trouble in paradise, they were just in development paradise. They were straight up not in development hell, they were in development heaven. And so somebody joked right here, this is the first game to ever be stuck in development heaven, and it got millions of views and tens of thousands of likes. Retweeting this clip from Jason Schreier, investigative reporter who talked to Team Cherry about, what exactly took so long about the game. And here's how Jason Schreier framed what he learned from the team. Here's what he said.
When I spoke to Team Cherry, they were like, yeah, it took 7 years because we were just having so much fun, and
wait, that's the reason?
It's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons.
They were having too much fun.
They have discovered this development methodology where they just have so much fun creating things that they were just like, all right, I mean, I guess it's done, but we're just having so much fun making this thing, coming up with new ideas. And
yeah, no joke, they were not stuck with the development of this game because they were grinding away at development issues and managerial issues and things not working and having to reboot the game, or not having a clear direction. All of those issues that plague development cycles, that lead to delays, that lead to development hell, they were just like, hey, let's just keep doing this because we have new ideas and we're having too much fun making this. Until one day they're like, okay, eventually we gotta actually ship a game. That's why it took them that long. And what's important to highlight about Silksong is that it initially started as this DLC for Hollow Knight. It was going to be smaller in scale, but then as they started developing this DLC, it just started to grow in scale. They kept coming up with new ideas, and eventually they were like, this cannot be a DLC. This has to be a full-fledged game. And then once they decided that, this game just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and not in a way where they were too ambitious for their own good, but in a way where they're like, let's just give players the most complete experience and really, go all out with this game and really infuse all of the ideas we have for this title. Jason Schreier goes into full details about this in this article titled Why Silksong Took 7 Years to Make, published on Bloomberg. You can read it for yourself, but the summary of it all is that they were just really so enamored with what they were making that they decided to take as much time as they needed. Here's what one of the co-founders of Team Cherry, Ari Gibson, had to say about why it took so long to make this game. Quote, Silksong was never stuck or anything. It was always progressing. It's just the case that we're a small team and games take a long time to make. There wasn't any big controversial moment behind it. And then this article mentions how this game expanded to have essentially a quest system. And whereas Hollow Knight had one town that served as a hub, Silksong has multiple towns, and so it is a significantly bigger game than Hollow Knight. This is one of those projects that continued to expand organically as the team realized they had even more ideas that could be implemented and that could serve the game. And that's in part why the game kept getting pushed back. So there's the Xbox event in 2022 when Silksong was in it, and Xbox said that all these games in this presentation would be out within a year. And this was something that Team Cherry genuinely believed. But then new ideas came about. So here's what one of the co-founders said. We did genuinely believe that was the case, that, Silksong would ship before June of 2023. There was a period of 2 or 3 years when I thought it was going to come out within a year, but the game kept growing. Silksong has more elaborate bosses than Hollow Knight, more gameplay systems, and more interactivity. Gibson and Pellin wanted objects in the world to react to Hornet's various tools, which required a ton of drawing and animation work. Gibson said, I think we're always underestimating the amount of time and effort it'll take us to achieve things. It's also the problem where, because we're having fun doing it, it's not like it's taking longer. This is awful. We really need to get past this phase. This is a very enjoyable space to be in. Let's perpetuate this with some new ideas. And it was this mentality of like, we've already spent so long on this. Why would we rush this now? Why would we not take as much time to really fine-tune everything? But as they add features, the complexity of the game grows, and the fine-tuning in turn kind of grows with it. And this being a smaller team, they just needed the time to make sure that this was the level of expansive they wanted it to be, that the ideas that they really wanted to implement could be implemented, and that all of it could ultimately ship to players and customers in a technically sound state. And what gave them the freedom to be able to take as long as they need to implement all of the systems that they wanted while still maintaining the team as agile and small and not kind of becoming over bloated, too many cooks in the kitchen and all that, not going that route, is the fact that Hollow Knight itself sold incredibly well. Jason Schreier learned from Team Cherry that when the studio announced Silksong in February of 2019, Hollow Knight had sold 2.8 million copies. Since then, over the course of all these years up until 25, Hollow Knight sold an additional 12 million copies, and that essentially allowed Team Cherry to work on this game at their own pace without any kind of external pressures, without financial pressures, without time limits, because they don't have a big publisher telling them what to do. They could just work indefinitely however long they wanted. They could have fun with the development of this game. It was literally just kind of a paradise of an environment for them to develop this title. Team Cherry's co-founders here talk about how they're happy that the game is finally coming out and that they have not felt like they've burned out or like they need to take a break or like, they've just done too much game development. The process they've maintained as something enjoyable for all these years without that burnout that comes with the usual game development cycle, especially in the AAA sector where there's financial pressure, where there's, deadlines that are unreasonable and the scale of games become unreasonable and all these things. With them keeping this process fun and reasonable, burnout doesn't exist, so they're happy to continue doing what they do. I mean, here's the way Gibson described this whole circumstance. We're very fortunate that we have a development method that is so enjoyable. Not exactly sure how we stumbled into that. Everything comes together quickly. You can see results fast. Ideas turn into something that exists in the game almost immediately before your eyes, and that's very satisfying. And that allows you to go off on those tangents and meet weird characters because someone's offhandedly mentioned a weird character as an idea, and the other person's laughed, and that's enough for that to be implemented. And then Pellin, the other co-founder, said, you're always working on a new idea, new item, new area, new boss. That stuff's so nice. It's for the sake of just completing the game that we're stopping. We could have kept going. They could have kept going for another few years because they kept brimming with ideas and their enjoyment of developing this game never stopped. And there was just never that sense of burnout. And it's just a way of developing games that is completely unprecedented. Full-fledged freedom because of financial successes from past projects, the ability to just say, okay, we got in more than enough money to be able to do what we want. And so that level of independence, that level of being able to wake up and do genuinely whatever they want and keep the process fun and work on it at their own pace and just keep things just creatively fulfilling. The way this game is made is how games should be made. Now, some people might argue, well, it took 7 years to make this game. That's too long of a wait. But I'm in the mindset of a game takes however long it takes to complete. And if it's 7 years that were well spent and where developers' mental and creative health were nourished, and if it all ultimately culminates in another masterpiece, I say I will wait however long for the next release. I'd rather wait 7 years for a new masterpiece than to have annualized releases of recycled, just kind of generic sequels over and over and over again, where the formula doesn't evolve, or where you can see that they're factory churning out products just to meet financial quotas rather than just pure creative drive. It's a methodology that leads to creative, mental, and even physical burnout, because you're not making something for the sake of almost like a passion project. You're making something for the sake of these arbitrary deadlines that are more kind of business minded rather than creative minded. It's not about, having fun making something. It's about, just trying to meet certain criteria for the sake of just corporate agendas. And, that's just not fun to do. Your work hours and all of the kind of elements that are difficult for game development, the way they're kind of condensed in a way that just cannot be done reasonably, that's where burnout comes from. That's when developers just stop having fun with the process, and it all becomes like an insufferable chore and a grind. And that's what this team kept this development process from becoming. Being massively successful doesn't suddenly mean you have to scale up to a degree that suddenly this thing becomes too big for you to handle. Team Cherry just maintained their old methodologies, but now without having financial worries, without ever having to be concerned about the one thing that, game development often has to be concerned about, money. And they took advantage of that freedom instead of using success as an excuse to confine themselves to all of these practices and all of these deadlines and all of these kind of almost like self-imposed obstacles that a lot of AAA game developers tend to, or, a lot of game publishers and the way they lead at AAA game development, the way they tend to fall into those traps that ultimately leads to a mess of a pipeline and development cycle that leads to development hell. Just seeing the way Silksong was made and the way indie developers are approaching game development, it just gives me hope, because where a lot of the AAA publishers are falling into all these traps that just serves as a huge detriment to their development cycles and the health of game developers and the health of the games industry and the products and the quality that comes out of it. You've got indie developers who are really just doing it right and who are really enjoying the ride. And when you enjoy the ride of a creative endeavor, the quality of the project and just what it exudes, all of that kind of reflects the enjoyment that the developers had making this thing, where they didn't feel like it was a chore. They didn't feel like they were suffering for this artwork, right? This piece of art, this piece of interactive media. There's a humility to Team Cherry's approach, where they made all the money in the world, but they still kind of kept the method that worked. They didn't fix what wasn't broken. And so I just want to applaud Silksong's developers. I want to applaud Team Cherry for kind of putting this out there and really highlighting how game development doesn't have to be the kind of the insufferable norm that it has become, the over-bloated mess that it has become. Or at the very least, that's one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Silksong and just the fact that it's finally coming out and what developers had to say about why it took so long to make. Are you satisfied with why it took 7 years to make this title, or would you have preferred that they kind of scaled back on certain aspects of just how much fun they were having and how creative they were being, or just how many ideas they had that they wanted to implement so that the development could be shorter, even if it meant like a smaller game at least that would have come out sooner? Are you more in that camp, or are you in the camp of let them cook however long they need to cook, which is the camp that I'm at? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.